The memoirist Glennon Doyle would call Peter a shover, I think. In her book, Love Warrior, Doyle talks about what happened when she tried to explain to others about the messy end of her marriage. She writes, "When I finish the telling, I want people to be as shocked and confused as I am. I want thunder to roll and mouths to drop open. But most often, the listener makes the pain harder for me by making it easier for her." She says if the receiver of the story is a shover, she listens with nervousness and then hurriedly explains that everything happens for a reason, or it's just darkest before the dawn, or God has a plan for you. Standing inside the wreckage of my marriage is too uncomfortable, so she uses these tired platitudes like a broom to sweep my shattered life into a tidy pile she can sidestep. That's Peter, rebuking Jesus for predicting the troubles to come. Probably also me. We humans have so little stomach for hopeless situations, mostly because we're so afraid that it might be contagious. If it can't be explained away, minimized, fixed, or leveraged for personal benefit, we deny it. But if we turn away from the suffering of others, we have to understand that what we are turning away from is God, the one who loves us enough to go down into the pit of despair and resurrect us. When Mark is writing his gospel, he is writing to a community that is suffering, a community well acquainted with despair, to borrow Isaiah's phrase. This gospel has an odor to it. It's an odor of smoke and rot and anguish. Mark's community is one that survived the first Jewish-Roman war and the fall of Jerusalem. The cross is not a theoretical torture device to them. They know crosses, the ones that the Romans would line the roads with, the bodies stinking, the loud rumble of empty bellies during the siege, the sound of falling debris as their lives crumble around them. When Jesus says he will suffer, when he talks about taking up crosses, they get it. You can imagine in this moment in the story the kind of sidelong glances as the community hears this, looking at those on the one hand whose loved ones' lives ended in the humiliation of the cross, born for Jesus' sake, and also those now humiliated for abandoning the community and their faith out of fear. In truth, Jesus' words about saving and losing one's life make the most sense to those well acquainted with despair. It is the parent who says, "Take me instead," when their child is beaten in a bathroom. It's the activist willing to go to jail or be run over by construction equipment for the sake of the trees or the lake or the sacred space whose holiness is only visible for those who look. It is, I think, the deep compassion so many of us feel for the people of Gaza and the desire to speak up for them that steps alongside a desire not to isolate or abandon our Jewish neighbors either. It is the feeling of hopelessness that is born out of the reality that things will remain this way precisely because somebody's profiting from it. The fracking, the drilling, the polluting continue because other options are more expensive, which of course means they have smaller profit margins. This passage commends those who stayed, those who were faithful, those who bore the cross. But it also does not abandon those who abandon Jesus to the cross, abandon the community into the hands of their enemies. It does not abandon those who, like Peter, still don't understand how it can be that the Messiah, the chosen one, the anointed king, would have to die on the cross. If this is God's plan, is God just a horrible planner? Because the truth is that we want God to have a plan that is glamorous and superhuman. We want theatrics. We want triumph. We want to believe that we can save ourselves from whatever disaster might befall us because that's the kind of God we're following. God all-powerful, God all-knowing, God all-good. And if that's the case, the math here just doesn't add up. Jesus says, the one who wants to save their life will lose it. But in my experience, when I try to save myself, I do. I brake hard and I avoid a collision. I trim the tree in my yard so a limb doesn't fall in a storm. I put my kids in car seats and I keep their vaccinations up to date. I even take steps to prevent harm to others. I'm first aid certified. I donate food to feed the hungry and money for shelter. But if I'm honest, I know that all the work I put into saving often keeps me from the equally important work of consoling those who are grieving what and who could not be saved. I look for fault and blame rather than provide comfort and relief. Perhaps what Jesus is pointing out is that we put an awful lot of work into saving ourselves, into shielding ourselves from hopelessness. And when we do that, we make ourselves unavailable to those who, in this moment, are in the depths of despair. Archbishop Oscar Romero said, "One must not love oneself so much as to avoid getting involved in the risks of life that history demands of us, and those that fend off danger will lose their lives." When we turn away from the vulnerable, the marginalized, the suffering, the grieving, we risk missing the God who took up the cross. The God not of the vaulted heavens, but of the pit. The God who, before being raised higher, first went lower and lower still, in order that we too might be raised to new life. At the end of the day, the gospel isn't the promise of some particularly happy ending. When Mark's community gets to the end of the story, it's not perfect. In fact, when Mark's gospel ends with the empty tomb, the women witnesses say nothing to nobody because they're terrified. The cross and resurrection do not keep us from the depths of despair of this life, but this passage gives the grieving and the guilt-ridden, the cross-bearers and the shame-faced, it gives them back to each other. It is a reminder, beloved, that we have been given to each other as a testimony that we are not alone. Christ is lower still.